Hey guys, so in this video I want to take some time to talk a bit about highlight groups inside of Neovim. If you're not familiar with this, it's essentially a collection of styling rules inside of your Neovim. It's very similar to CSS classes if you're coming from web development. To start, let's open up Vim and open up a file here, let's say init.lua, and then type in highlight. Here you see a huge list of highlight groups essentially. And by definition, this thing here is the name of the highlight group. This here is the color of the text, and this here is the background or the color of the behind the text. Now you should see also like things like links, which is in a way to inherit highlight groups from a different one. For example, like line number above will inherit from line number. And these are what highlight groups essentially are inside of your Neovim. Now let's take a look at a very specific example. So you see here we have this comment here, right? If I do highlight again and search for comment, here you see we have the specific highlight group essentially for the comment. So for this thing you're seeing here, right? And this comment has a foreground, which is like a text color of this thing, which is kind of this grayish thing you're seeing here. So this is kind of the most basic thing about highlight groups, and we're going to dive a bit deeper here and kind of take more examples. But let's say you want to see what highlight groups you have inside of your Neovim. There are a couple ways you can do so. So the first one I want to show you is if you type in vim runtime /syntax /hi test.vim, I think. And if you open that up, you should be able to see a massive list of all the highlight groups you have, essentially all the highlights you have inside of this Neovim configuration. Sweet, but if you have Telescope or something like snacks.nvim, you can also search for that, like here for example, and this way you can see all the highlight groups as well with all the colors highlighted directly. For example, if you type in comment here, you see we got our comment and then we got this color that belongs to it. So that's like some of the ways you can search through your highlight groups inside of Neovim. Cool. Now, if you want to learn more about this, you can just visit the docs, and there's a syntax docs here that has a ton of information about this. However, I want to point you out to this other thing here, which is the naming convention. This is important to know, especially if you're trying to kind of change colors for your syntax and UI and things like that. So some kind of conventions, comments, essentially here it will tell you whatever like the highlight group meaning is. So for example, float is this thing, Boolean, it's true or false. What is a keyword? Repeat, for example, for, do, while. So if you go, for example, here, I have a quick example here, Lua. If, then, true are keywords, for example. For here is a keyword. Like this is what the definition of the thing is inside of your editor here. And it's good to know about these things if you're designing a theme, for example. Now, if I go back to my Neovim here, and actually let's go back to the browser. Just make sure to read all of these things to know what each one actually means if you're trying to modify things. It's very useful. All right, so let's go back to Neovim here and look at how we can actually modify these highlight groups. So Neovim has a Lua API that we can use, which is this one, vim.api.nvim set highlight group, essentially, HL. Now this takes a couple things here. The first parameter can be 0 or kind of a highlight group. If you put 0 here, it's actually going to mean it's going to be global. So this can be applied everywhere in all the languages and etc. Next, you can define the highlight group name. For example, I don't know, my group, for example. And then here you get to decide on the foreground and the background and attributes. So let's say we have foreground is equal to, and then here you can essentially say the color as hex, or you can even just use the name of the color if you know what you want to do here. And same with the background. You can say equal, and then say, I don't know, blue, for example. And then this defines the highlight groups. So now you have that highlight group that is global. The name is my group. It has a text color of red, and the color behind the text is blue. That's how you define a highlight group. Okay, so now let's try to change the highlight group for this comment you see here. Okay, so I'm going to comment this again, and let's define a new highlight group that will change how the comments look in our code. So vim.api.nvim highlight group, and then I want this to be 0 again. I want the comment highlight group, and I want to change this to the following. So I can do here foreground equal to, which is the text color essentially, and I'm just going to put it as red actually. And then I want to make the italic equal to true. This is the attribute. This will essentially change this comment from whatever it is right now. It's going to make the color red and it's going to make it italic. So if I restart Neovim, see here, it changed it. And that's the whole point really. Okay, so if you're still using Vim for some reason and you're using Vim script, the way you can apply this as well is by doing highlight. Obviously you're writing your Vim script. I'm just write it as a command here. And then say the highlight group name, let's say comment, and then you can do GUI foreground equal to, let's say, red, and I don't know, GUI equal to italic. So notice that this does the same thing, it's just using Vim script. Usually you have these inside of your config and not in a command, by the way. So now let's take a look at some useful examples, I guess. So we know that we have like to-dos in our code, right? So if I just restart this quickly, we know we have like the concept of to-dos. So we can do to-do, this is a task or whatever, right? So it's useful sometimes to make this like highlighted differently than a comment. So you have some plugins that does that usually, but let's say we want to do it ourselves. And to do so, obviously using highlight groups, we can do vim.api.nvim set highlight. And then here we can do 0 again, because we want this to be applied on all languages and everywhere, right? And we can do something like to do comment, for example. And then here, let's do foreground equal to yellow, for example. And then we want the background to be equal to red. And I want bold to be equal to true. So if I restart this, notice that nothing really happened just yet. And here's why. When you create the highlight group, you actually need to apply it on this to do. And Neovim will not know how to do that without you telling it. Essentially, you need to pattern match it, right? You need to look at the text inside of your buffer here and say, if we have this to do thing, change the color or apply this to do comment highlight group on it. And the way you can do so is by auto commands. Auto commands is essentially something that will automatically run whenever you run Neovim. So the API for that is vim.api.nvim create auto cmd or command. And here we can do something like buffer read. So whenever you read the buffer, or you can do buffer new file as well. And here, the way you can do so is saying pattern equal to a star. So all patterns that looks like to do essentially. And then we have a callback is equal to a function. And then here we can do something like vim.function or .match. You can say to do. And then here we can say to do. So what this does is every time you read a buffer or create a new buffer, it's going to automatically run this thing and say, whenever you have this to do word here, apply this highlight on it. If we restart, notice here we have this to do now. It's kind of background red and then the color is yellow. That's exactly what this thing is doing. Now let's make this a bit more interesting. So if I paste this code this time here, so we know we have like to-dos, we have info, we have fix me, we have things like that, right? And what I can do here is just apply a couple more here. So instead of to do comment here, we have to do high, and then we got to do medium, and then to do low. And first one is going to be to do, and usually have this like this next to the to do, and then here we got say fix me. And then here we got, let's say not. And now we have like more options, right? So if I go back up here and say, fix me, and put this here and then say, fix this thing. And then I do something like note. This is a note. And I can restart this guy and notice that we have some more highlights. Now, this one did not get highlighted because the pattern match said we need to add this colon here. So that's like a very practical example on how you can use highlight groups. You can essentially define these colors yourself and then say, I want to have red, yellow, and blue for whatever pattern I'm trying to match. So let's take another example here and look at how we can use link inside of this. If I paste this line here and explain what it does. So for all global highlights, we have this to do high, which is the one we have here. I want to link it to the comment. What this means is whatever the colors or kind of styling for this comment, I want that to be applied to the to do high. Now, if I save this and restart, notice that this to do here now looks like a comment. It has the same exact kind of colors and background and etc. like comments. And that's the idea here. So we just inherited whatever the comment highlight groups and put them inside of the to do highlight, essentially. That's how this works. So this can be useful, for example, if you want to have a specific colors for a comment in JavaScript, but that's like different than Go, for example. So you can change this per language if you want to. So let's say you want to change like the comment color or comment like highlight group specifically inside of JavaScript files. So here you see we have a auto command for that and on the file type. So whenever we load the file essentially that has a type of JavaScript, we need to set the highlight group for the comments to be text equal red and the background of that text has to be blue. That's how you can do so. Now for different languages, you can have a different pattern. For example, this can be equal to Go or whatever, and this will be applied on that specific language and so on and so forth. So one more thing you need to keep an eye on is this term GUI colors. Make sure this is set to true inside of your configuration. Without this, I think some of these options will not really work correctly. So yeah, just make sure this term GUI colors is set to true. Finally, a couple tips to keep in mind. So if you're doing something like this, so you're pattern matching using regex, if you have something complex, this will slow things down. So your colors will not instantly change. They will kind of change a little bit after you open up your Neovim buffer or file. So it's kind of better to do it this way whenever possible. So just the actual thing without regex. And another thing is you can lazy load these things. So for example, here's a very basic example. In this Lua file, we want to apply these highlights. So you can do something like this. For example, if it's not loaded, and then set it to true. And this way, this thing here will be applied if it is loaded. Obviously, there's probably a better way to do this, but lazy load them whenever is possible. This will improve the performance of this whole experience. All right, so here's a practical example in my Neovim configuration. I got this cappuccino theme that you're looking at right now. And for example, if I open up my search here, it doesn't look like the default one. It's gonna looks a bit nicer in my opinion. And I did customize all of that and I added more options. So here we have like the Blink CMP, for example, snacks. These are kind of by default inside of this theme. You can set them, but also I managed to update some of these things, which is really the highlight groups. All these things you're seeing here are essentially the highlight groups. I looked at them up using this guy. And then once I found what I wanted to change, I spent the time to kind of apply different colors. And that gives me that look and feel you're looking at right now. And same as well with this the status line here. So play around with this, change some colors, change some a few UI elements, and have fun. So that's everything I wanted to share in this video. I hope you found it useful, and I'll see you in the next one.